This lecture will cover the chapter called The Development of Classical Myth. If you want to take notes, I suggest adding to your guided notes from the chapter called The Cultural Context of Classical Myth. We're only going to briefly cover this chapter, just the highlights. As I mentioned previously, myths go way back. Your chapter does a fine job of framing the time frame. Do remember that although ancient Greeks lived in the Baltic or Balkan area, historians believe that they're an offshoot of Mesopotamian culture rather than developing all on their own. The map on this slide shows just how far off Mesopotamia was from ancient Greece. The artifacts from ancient societies offer many figurines that have exaggerated sexual organs, plump buttocks, and breasts. Such objects are the oldest freestanding sculptures in the world, says Powell. For instance, your book offers a photograph of the goddess giving birth. It's a statue from Çatalhöyük in Turkey, and it is from 6500 to 5700 BCE. This statue is just 16 inches tall. Such statues are common in agricultural communities and are tied to fertility. Another figure to point out is the Cycladic mother figure. This one is from the Aegean Sea island of Cyclades and dates from around 3000 BCE. It's tall at 5 feet and has sharp angles and is curiously minimalist with small breasts and a triangle for the pubic region. Note that this and the one on the previous slide have no names because they were created before the written word. All we have are our theories about what they meant to their societies. Your book has a gold pendant of Artemis Potnia Theron dating from around 650 BCE. In it she has lions on each side. On the slide I have artwork that is on display in a museum in Florence, Italy, and it's dated around 570 BCE. On either side is a lion and some sort of deer. Unlike the first two statues I went over, we have a familiar name, Artemis. That alone tells you how old the stories about Artemis really are. Like the Catal statue, she has an animal on each side. We know that there was a historical religious cult of the goddess Artemis who protected our animals. What I want you to get from all this is how we try to piece together information about long ago cultures from what's left of their artifacts. Another quick point. We have an overlap between ancient Greece and ancient Rome, and that will come up again and again. Here are two photographs. On the left we have the Parthenon from ancient Greece, and on the right we have the Pantheon from ancient Rome. The Parthenon celebrates Athena, and the Pantheon celebrated Roman gods. Let's point out another comparison between Greece and Rome. In ancient Greece we have Zeus, but in ancient Rome he was called Jupiter. There's a chart in your book with a list of Greek gods and their Roman counterparts. Of course, you will see two photos of the same statue on this slide. When you look this up, you will find this statue listed as Zeus and listed as Jupiter. I have given up trying to figure out which is the accurate name. Still, it makes my point of duality. It's in this chapter that makes the point about the Linear B tablet listing the gods and goddesses from very early on. It also covers in more detail about the oral poets and gives you the terms adio and adiao. Again, you need to remember that the earliest Greek literature comes from poems of Homer and Hesiod. Homer only makes one little comment about the convention of writing in all his works. I begin with the question about what's the issue with this sculpture. Simple. We have no idea what Homer looked like, so this statue, although old, is entirely made up. Again, from the archaic period, you have to remember Homer and the fact that he wrote the Iliad with around 16,000 lines and the Odyssey with around 12,000 lines. They are long poems that tell a story, epic poems. The part about the alphabet's invention is interesting because he only mentions it just once. And we use the clues in his writing to figure out more about ancient Greece, especially during his lifetime. We also have no idea what Hesiod looked like either, but the statue is still helpful. When you hear the name Hesiod, associate it with his being the author of Theogony, which deals with the origin of the gods. He also wrote Works and Days, and that deals more with morality. Hesiod is considered the first European author, and he is credited with giving us the first definition of poet. And he tells us why a poet can speak with authority about the past, the present, and the future. Who wrote the Homeric hymns? Who knows? Not Homer. Sorry, I couldn't resist being glib, but seriously, we don't know. Back in ancient times, Homer was given credit for having created them, but we have figured out that he did not. They were created a century or two after he lived. Know that in this case, a hymn is a metrical address invoking a god or goddess by listing cultic names and telling an important story about that deity. When it comes to the arts, know that the classical period, there was no one authority on myths. They owned culturally. The myths introduced humanism during this period and often were seen in tragic plays. The classic period gave us our first literary critic. Like critics of today, Aristotle studied the literature of his times and came up with theories and ideas about them, and we still use them today. Note the big three when it comes to playwrights. Aeschylus, who wrote 80 plays and only 7 survived, Sophocles, who wrote 123 plays and only 7 survived, and Euripides, who wrote 90 plays and only 19 survived. Alexander the Great during the Hellenistic period was important because he caused the center of Greek culture to be outside of Greece for 300 years. He established the first real library. There were scholars who studied and wrote about the ancient Greeks, and during this period, Apollonius of Rhodes wrote the Argonautica. And finally, the Library of Apollodorus came about, a volume of collected myths. Today we talk about cultural appropriation, and that is not a new concept. The Romans appropriated Greek myth. We will cover these folks throughout the semester, but again we have Virgil, with Aeneas showing up in the Aeneid. Ovid wrote Metamorphoses. There's Livy the historian who studied Greek myth and Greek history. It's during this time that they began to standardize the Greek myths. During this course, we will try to separate myth from literature to truly understand. Now we're going to go to myths of creation.